Our compromise to
Hi, Dave.
There's one right there on the corner of that. Yeah, you can move that one.
Okay, thank you.
Mine got to 75. I was like, that's enough of this. And I turned it down to 72.
Now, did the minutes did you get my message?
Yeah, they were there. I put them there maybe an hour, hour and a half before
I'm
you
usually
called.
like a 68. Oh,
Okay, I got to refresh.
It's all right.
summer I'm doing
Yeah.
better.
It
I
was
got
on my
72,
to-do list
71,
this
and I
morning.
think it's mostly the drive.
It's looking fine on YouTube.
For me, it's mostly to
Okay.
get the humidity out.
All right, we'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and
All right. Next item is public comment. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? Anybody wish to make a public comment? If not, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from the June 8th meeting. They were added to the packet. They were also part of the county board packet that was distributed last week. Any questions, comments, or motions? Moved by Supervisor Hart, seconded by Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of minutes will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Supervisor Marshall has indicated that she is tied up and won't be able to join us, so if you could mark her as excused. We added an item under 6B, termination of deed restrictions, 740 Greenway Court, Mosinee. I'll turn it over to Corp Counsel Pruner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually approached about this item by the current owner of this property, which is Commonwealth Development Corporation. Their representative, Tyler Sheeran, is available today virtually for any questions the committee has. This is a piece of property that is in the city of Mosinee. It was formerly county property, and it was actually deeded back in 1989 to the corporation that developed the Indian Head Golf Course. At the time the county deeded it, we included back in 1989 certain deed restrictions that are outlined in your packet. Some of those restrictions are no longer, in my mind, legally applicable. There was obviously a golf course constructed on the majority of that property, so the right of first refusal for the county likely would legally no longer be valid. The other restrictions that are still in place on the remaining land is that the land can only be used for golf course purposes, and there is also a right of the county and the city of Mosinee to construct a well and associated pump house on the property. So we have an easement that is currently present and running with the property as well for that if the county wished to exercise it or if the city wished to exercise that. I was approached because this company is looking at developing the property, not for golf course purposes, obviously, because the golf course is already built, and they were seeking to have the county lift those restrictions. That would require action by the board. The board is empowered to lift those restrictions if the board felt it was appropriate to do so. So that is why this is before you. I'm sure Mr. Sheeran can add more details about the proposed development. So if Mr. Sheeran, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Beautiful. So guys, thank you, Attorney Perner here. So guys, we are here looking to kind of construct the second half of this Indian Head Cottages development, if you will, when we had originally kind of put this development in place with the city back in 2010. It entailed 48 units. And so we had constructed the first 24 and now looking to kind of implement that remaining 24, just kind of given the success that we've had in the area and the current demand. And so kind of working through that on the title front, we realized there's a couple restrictions, that we just feel are simply outdated, given the fact that the golf course has since been constructed and no longer necessarily applicable to this space. And the only other comment I would add as it relates to kind of the one that could possibly still be applicable would be the need to construct the pump house and well that Attorney Perner had mentioned. We had talked to the city and their public works department, and they are in agreement that that is not necessarily required anymore and are willing to sign off on that one. So would like to kind of alleviate the concern for that possibly being needed going forward. But I think for the remaining items there, as Attorney Perner had stated, they're no longer necessarily applicable, just given the fact that this was kind of deeded about 30 years ago and the golf course has since been there. But happy to answer kind of any questions that you guys have as it relates to the development or anything along those lines in efforts of kind of giving your guys approval here as we are looking to move forward with it and hopefully can start construction here in the next 30 to 45 days.
Are there any questions for either the Corp Counsel or the representative for the developer? Kurt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only question I would have is, does this remove the deed restrictions on the property that was developed as a golf course?
No, actually, the document that's been drafted by counsel for the property owner that I've reviewed, it's in your packet as well. If the board were to approve this transaction, that would be executed. That actually indicates that the remaining restrictions on any other land would continue to run. It's just on this particular parcel that they're intending to develop.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? And Michael and I met with, or had a meeting with the representatives a while ago, and we don't have a lot of records. The county's records are kind of sparse as to the intent going back there, and I think this puts it on the tax rolls. And they have an 18-hole golf course there, and so they fulfilled the intent of, I think, the county's intent at that time. This would have been part of the Central Wisconsin Business Park or the airport property, which we have recently transferred one of those parcels back to the city of Mosinee, so it would be consistent with earlier action that the committee took. So what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the removal of the deed restrictions conditioned on the city of Mosinee also agreeing to release the water facilities easement portion.
Is there a second? Seconded by Leahy. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of the motion to approve the resolution subject to the city of Mosinee agreeing to the terms relative to the water and pump house will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we will move on to the presentations relative to the Applications for the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and again, parties have submitted applications or interest. We would ask that you limit your comments to no more than 10 minutes. The committee will be beginning the discussion later today on the ranking process, and we hopefully will complete that at our first meeting in July to take to the county board later that month. So we'll call first on North Central Healthcare for discussion of their addition and remodel request.
Yep. We go up there more.
Either one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Mort McBain. I'm the interim executive director at North Central, and I thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and talk about the very important project we have going on at North Central. I have with me Troy Torgerson, who is the project manager and construction manager and planner for facilities and maintenance. And he can answer some questions. He's been with us for a very long time if we get into any specific details of the construction and the phases of construction. I want to just very briefly outline North Central Healthcare as an organization. Some of you may not be quite as familiar with it as others. At the Health and Human Services Committee last month, I presented this little booklet to all the members of the committee, and I thought we would maybe do that here, but that would take a little more time than we have. I'm just going to very briefly go through the programs at North Central. North Central Healthcare is a huge facility out by the municipal airport if you've never been on that campus. We offer many services. Many of the services and programs we offer are mandated by the state. The counties are mandated to provide services to the county residents, all areas of mental health, developmentally disabled population. These services are mandated to be provided, and North Central fills that role as the provider of these services on behalf of Marathon County and Langlade County and Lincoln County. We're a three-county consortium. It's a very complex organization, and it has many different parts to it. After the difficulties and challenges last year with the management out there, we found ourselves without a CEO and without a finance director, two very critical positions in the organization. And at that point, I was contacted by the board for North Central and asked if I'd be willing to come back and step in as an interim director to keep things going, and I agreed to that. My primary role out there is to, well, I've got about three things on my top of my priority list. One thing is to keep everything together, have somebody to sign all the documents and keep the management team working and coherent together. Another project was to hire a finance director as soon as possible, and then the overriding proposition for me was to get a CEO in there, a permanent CEO, as soon as possible to start rebuilding the organization. And so that's what I've been doing. We've already got a finance director on board, and we'll talk a little bit about that later when we get to Chairman's question about how things are going at North Central. So we are a very vital organization in this county, in this community, providing services. In 2019, North Central undertook a major renovation project for the whole campus. It includes remodeling all of the facilities and some additions. to improve our programming and our access. And this is about a 4-year project, major project. At the time we set this project in place, it was approved by the county board, and we had estimates of what it would take. The county, as you know, does the borrowing for these kinds of major capital projects. And this is a county organization, the county department, if you like. So the county is responsible for bonding for the cost of this capital project. And so they began the process. Now, 3.5 years later, after having gone through COVID, as we bid out phase 6 of the project, which includes Mountain View Care Center, the big nursing home out there, much to our dismay, we found that the bids that were coming in were much, much higher than we had anticipated when the project was bid out or was projected anyway at the beginning. And there are obvious reasons for this. One reason is that the cost of materials has really gone through the roof. There's huge problems with the supply chain. If you know anybody that works in construction, they will tell you that there are problems all over the place with supplies, and the result has been that the costs for this phase have gone through the roof. And we can blame that on COVID, and that's literally true. To my way of thinking, ARPA was designed in part to deal with those financial impacts across the country. And many municipalities are experiencing problems with their projects because of COVID and the supply chain problems. So as a result of that, we have put together a request to use ARPA funds to finish phase 6 of the project. I don't know if you've seen that application. You may have it in front of you. But the total increases that we experienced in phase 6 are approximately $3.1 million. We did not anticipate this when we started the project, and there's no way we can stop because we're already, halfway through the project. So that means that we need extra funds to finish this project, even though we didn't do anything wrong. But like many other municipalities, we're faced with serious cost increases to finish this project in a timely manner. So with that, I'll stop, and I would be glad to answer questions, and we'll have Troy come up, and he can help me with some of the more technical aspects of this project. And I'll also be glad to answer questions about North Central generally, where we're going, what we've done to improve the management efficiencies out there, and what we're currently doing to get the organization back on track, both with operations and with their capital project. So Troy, if you'd like to come up, we can tag team any questions on the project. And I'll ask Mr. Chairman if he has any questions to begin.
One of the questions that I would have is, and I think we need to do the internal review, is that I know that there were limits on capital spending within the ARPA dollars. Of anything over $1 million would have to go through a process. I think we want to make sure that when if we do an allocation, that we're compliant with those federal requirements. So I think we'll have to do some due diligence on how we label that and quantify it. But I had last month gone to the board meeting for the Community Services Board and asked that they develop a plan, because not only are we going to be dealing with the issue of the cost overruns, but we also have lost revenues associated with the operations at North Central Healthcare. And I had indicated that one of the requirements that the county board would be interested in is having a plan on how we're going to deal with that projected shortfall. So if you could just, and I understand that you've got new finance director coming on board, but if you could just give us an outline of how you're approaching the current, the deficit associated with that because the pandemic was the perfect storm, both in terms of lost revenues for a behavioral health nursing home and in others, but on a long-term basis, we have to have a better understanding about where we're going and what that might entail as we begin to look at our allocation of these dollars.
Right, thank you. That was a great question. A bit long, but it was a great question. We do have plans to bring the organization back to what I would say is a state of accountability. One of the previous challenges that we've had out there is that there was kind of a disconnect between management levels, between the management and the executive committee, between the management and the county board. One of my charges was to bring those entities together. And you do that by creating more trust in the management. One of our first steps, as the Chair mentioned, was to hire a finance director. We've hired a finance director, and he's been on board for about 3 weeks, and he's already discovering many inefficiencies with the way things are organized there. One of our big challenges, and this is one of my instructions going forward from the committee, is to set the budget for next year. So that will be our biggest single challenge in terms of the finances, which is underlying a lot of the issues out there. So this will be a very interesting budget process for us at North Central. The finance director and I have already started the process of collecting all the budgets from all the programs. And we are anticipating that there will be significant changes in some of the programs, especially for those programs that are not core programs, especially for those that are not core programs and that are subsidized by North Central. There may be some programs that will be eliminated. Other programs will be downsized or right-sized, and we will provide a balanced budget for next year's budget. That was something that did not happen in 2022. We began this year with a budget with a built-in deficit of $2.1 million. Think about that for a minute. A public entity adopting a budget that's already $2.1 million out of balance. If I were doing that as county administrator years ago, I would have been told off, at the very least, if not shown the door, and told to get somebody that knew how to balance a budget. But those are the facts. So one of our prime responsibilities this year for the finance director and I is to get that budget back in balance. And it will entail some pain, some cutting, some changes to programs, some reduction in services. It will not reduce in any way the core programs that we are required or mandated to provide. We have no choice in that matter. The state dictates the kinds of programs that we provide under Chapter 51. We have no choice. We have to provide those things, and then North Central is the entity that provides those programs on behalf of Marathon County. There are many other programs offered by North Central, and we will be taking a very hard look at all those programs. As I said, the core programs, the mandated programs will remain. Everything else is open for change, for reduction, for elimination, and it will be a tough budget year. But it's the only way we can get back to a balanced budget out there, because the county does subsidize the operations there wherever they have to. And we would like to get that subsidy reduced back to what it has been for many years. So that's a very general answer, but I can promise you that with the new finance director and myself, we will be working on this from now till the budget's done. And we will not provide a budget unless it's balanced properly. We may require a little more subsidy to make that work. And this is one of the areas where you can help. Again, because we're faced with this cost overrun, unanticipated through no fault of our own, but it's very real. And there will be another ARPA request for a much smaller amount, probably next month, for the operations to help us balance the operational budget to make up for the start of the year budget deficit. But that will be a much smaller amount than previously thought. So that's a long answer to a long question. Other questions,
Chair
we'd be
Gibbs.
happy to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mort, for that explanation. The argument, some of the questions or some of the criticisms is there the ability to scale back to bring within the original budgeted amount the scope of the project? And so I guess let's address that head on, that the scope of the project is or is not scalable back by 3.1 million to accomplish what we still would need.
That's a great question, so I'll have Troy answer that one.
Thought I was going to get away with not having to answer anything. A short answer to that, we're looking at everything we can right now from a value engineering standpoint. To scale it back, we're a little bit too far down the road. I don't know if we're going to try to dial the 3.1 million, $1.15 million back. There's a couple areas I see some opportunities. We will also take a look back into the D-wing and everything else that we can scale this back and try to, but I don't think we could actually get it back to net zero on that one, as much as I would like to. Because at one point in time when we were in the new construction, we were really looking good, but then 2020 hit us right square in the nose on that one. So to answer that, that information will be passed through. Mort will know about that right away. And when we can find those opportunities, we'll scale back as much as we can.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hart.
I just had a question of, you say we're in phase 6. How many phases are there to go, and what's all been completed? Kind of just an update, because my concern here is, so if we give ARPA funds for this, is there going to be more construction costs in the future that is also going to have an increase because of the supply chain and all the things you mentioned?
Great question, and there's a pretty good graphic showing that. This is the last major phase of construction. The only thing we'd have to do for the North Central Healthcare addition and remodel, as it was approved by the county board 3-4 years ago now, is we have to reconstruct the north field, and that's known somewhere in the neighborhood as the soccer field. But everything right now is accounted for except for that, and we're not seeing any additional costs right there. The paperwork that Mort handed you out right now, we're in the Mount View Care Center phase. The last phase of that is just the north field. So no, we're nearing the end. We won't have anything else that should come up like this.
Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. I have a question, and you may be able to answer it yourself if that's more appropriate. In the pending project list, we have listed North Central Healthcare fund balance for 6 million something. Is that still something that we're going to be asked for, or is that no longer applicable?
That request was the one that I talked about coming maybe next month, but it will not be anywhere close to 6.3. We've already been working on that. It may come in closer to 1.2, 1.3.
Thank you.
So that was the concern that sort of drove my going to the Community Services Board, is where are we? And, I would just like to just interject a word of caution. I know that in a different capacity as chair of the Wausau Policing Task Force, that there's a desire to expand the crisis services. So I think we have to be careful that we try to deal with the behavioral health needs of the community, and not only be looking at cost cutting, but rather enhanced delivery of those services, because there are some, the pandemic proved that there are some very real and necessary behavioral health services that we need to make sure we can get online and perhaps be more self-sufficient in terms of revenue associated with billing for those services. So please keep that in mind as you go about developing that plan.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Troy. Next, we'll call on, the Fenwood Creek Watershed. Laura?
Thank you.
Is this what was?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kirsty Heidenreich, and I am the Conservation Program Manager for Marathon County Conservation Planning and Zoning Department.
And I'm Brooke Bembenek, the grazing analyst for Marathon County CPZ.
And we are here to talk to you today about an innovative approach for how to meet Fenwood Creek's water quality goals. And we are coming to you today on behalf of the Environmental and Resources Committee because they did unanimously support this request. And so they have given their full approval to move this forward and to seek these funds from the county. So we wanted to talk to you about 3 specific goals that we have for the Fenwood Creek watershed. The first one is to reduce the phosphorus runoff from cropland from a current level of 6 pounds per acre for dairy farms to 2.5 pounds per acre. And the reason this is important is because the runoff of phosphorus from our croplands into surface water greatly impacts the quality of the surface water. So even 1 pound of phosphorus, when it hits surface water, it can produce up to 500 pounds of algae. So keep in mind, we're trying to go from 6 pounds per acre to 2.5 pounds per acre. So we can all do the math if we know 1 pound of phosphorus can create up to 500 pounds of algae. So these are huge, huge amounts that we're targeting for removing. This first bullet point is especially important because it relates very specifically to our strategic plan that we've developed as a county. So our county's comprehensive plan identifies in many spots the needs related to promoting sound land use decisions and to protecting our natural resources. And our strategic plan has 2 goals in it that are specific to these areas as well. So our strategic plan is charging all of us here at the county level to promote sound land use decisions that conserve and preserve natural resources as well. And within this, the reduction of phosphorus in the Fenwood watershed is specifically listed in the county strategic plan. And it's saying that we need to reduce this amount by 20% to be successful in this watershed. The strategic plan also goes into how important it is that we must protect and enhance the quality and quantity of potable groundwater and surface water supplies in the county. And 2 strategies within that goal of enhancing the water resources relate specifically to this pilot project within the Fenwood Creek watershed. So the strategies within that say we need to develop a management plan within this watershed that target the impacts that we have on water quality. Another strategy in there that we have created says we need to create new partnerships with agencies and organizations to further efforts to protect surface and groundwater in these areas. So that's kind of our first goal that we have in this, kind of first and foremost, but also, number 2, you'll see here we want to implement all of the agricultural performance standards within the watershed as well. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but what we want to do is make sure first and foremost that all 65 farms we have in this watershed are following all the rules that the state of Wisconsin says are sound decisions. We also know that if this project is implemented, it could absolutely achieve the county's strategic plan goal of reducing phosphorus in this watershed by 20%. So this specific approach is innovative because it moves farmers from good managers to great managers of the land. Marathon County continually is a leader in conservation in the state of Wisconsin. Not because we are just the biggest county geographically, but because we have been leaders. We do the most conservation projects every year. We receive the most money for conservation funding from the State Department of Ag every year. We spend the most money in Wisconsin on nutrient management planning with our farmers. There are many other county conservation departments that look to Marathon County as innovative leaders. They look to us for ideas on how to approach these big picture ideas. We also want to do this because it moves beyond the state standards for ag performance. Those are all basic things we know we need to do, but now we know we need to take things to the next level if we're going to achieve success. This approach also provides incentive for the implementation of superior management systems. So we already have a lot of great farmers in this watershed, but folks that would be able to implement some of these new management systems would be going above and beyond the majority of what farmers are already doing in Wisconsin. So what we like to say, this approach, it rewards the best and it inspires the rest. So word of mouth is so powerful. We know that if farmers start implementing these strategies, we'll reward them for taking the risk, for doing it, for being the leaders. But then we also want to inspire the other people that are seeing what's going on as well. So unfortunately, these are real life pictures of the Big O Plain. This was taken in 2009. There have been several fish kills on this reservoir, and there are many impacts across the county when we see scenes like this. Of course, this is going to result in less recreating and tourism dollars on the Big O Plain. We know that looking at the Wisconsin Department of Tourism Resources, we can see that in 2021, Marathon County was the 10th in the state for tourism dollars and recreation. And we know that a lot of that money that we receive in the county is based on our water that we have. People come here to boat, to water ski, to go to our lakes, everything like that. And so when we take away that key component of recreating, then we're really we're hurting ourselves by not investing in that. We'd be bringing more money into the county by investing in clean water. So when this happened in 2009, what it initiated is groups of people coming together, like the Wisconsin Department of Ag, livestock producers, the Big O Plain organization, the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company, and they sat down, they created a plan, and they said, we don't ever want to see this kind of fish kill, this level of catastrophe happen again in the county. So what came out of that is not only wanting to upgrade the aerator system out there, but they created a long-range plan of work for the watershed. And that long-range plan of work meant creating a pilot program in the future to try to fix the watershed as a whole instead of putting a Band-Aid on something like a reservoir. So we need to look at the big picture approach. So we know that if we don't do something to fix what we are seeing in scenes like this, we do know that impaired waters in our county, it reduces property taxes that are around these water bodies. We know that poor water quality impairs the health of the citizens with utilizing the unhealthy water, and we know for sure that this poor water quality does impact the recreational and tourism values of the county as well. So the question we have to ask is, can we have fish and cheese? Can we have healthy lakes? And can we have farmers and cows who are happy making us all the delicious treats that we all enjoy? So why are we picking the Fenwood? In Marathon County, we actually have 12 small watersheds like the Fenwood that are just as impaired as the Fenwood. So you may ask, why are we picking this single watershed? This watershed is the #1 priority in Marathon County's land and water resource management plan. It also is the best representation of agriculture in Marathon County. It has a little bit of everything. It has several what we call CAFOs, kind of the larger, more factory-style farms. It has small dairies. It has grazers. It has everything in between. It has 65 farms total. And this area has about 25,000 acres that flow into the Big O Plain Reservoir. 65% of the watershed is cropland. And really, when we're looking at all of these puzzle pieces coming together, it is a challenge to think, how can we support our farmers when we know ag is still such a big picture in Marathon County, but how can we also reduce the soil and phosphorus runoff as well? So Brooke will tell us how. Oh, I'm sorry, one more slide. So we just wanted to show everyone too, as we're referencing the ag performance standards. These are all standards that the state of Wisconsin is saying this is what needs to be met at minimum from farmers. And it's all common sense things. Of course, we can't have the overflow of manure storage facilities. We can't have manure piles too close to streams or lakes. But we have determined, based on data in this watershed, that even if all 65 farms are 100% in compliance in this watershed with everything you see on this list, we will not be able to meet the state standards for what we are dumping into the Wisconsin River. And by dumping, I mean the amount of phosphorus entering the Wisconsin River at the bottom of this watershed. We don't want to kick the can down the road to our neighbors downstream of us in the Wisconsin River and say, sorry, we're way over the limit of what we're supposed to be allowing to go downstream. So, we're very sorry that, Petenwell and Castle Rock and all those lakes have a lot of algae, but, we know where these sources are coming from. So how do we get there, Brooke?
So we get there through superior farming practices, and this is what is included in superior farming practices is longer hay rotations, using more grass-based agriculture, managed grazing, and no-till and cover crops that you see on the screen here. And with the implementation of these practices, we can see a reduction of 60% or more of phosphorus levels in the watershed. So using these common sense farming practices plus our superior cropland farming practices will get us to the reduction of phosphorus levels that we're looking for. But not only do we need those superior farming practices, we need to engage with our community. And one way that that Marathon County has been able to do that is with our collaboration with EPIC, which is the O Plain Partnership for Integrated Conservation. EPIC is a community-led watershed group. You might know of other producer-led watershed groups in the state, but EPIC is the most progressive and the one taking on most action to have change in our community. So we have a network of farmers, shoreland owners, recreators, fishermen, agribusinesses, NRCS, government agencies, and non-government agencies all coming together, sitting around the table and finding common ground about how we're gonna make water quality happen in Marathon County. And so EPIC has been instrumental in bridging the gap between Marathon County and landowners. And we really need to have this community engagement to see the cumulative effect that we need on water quality. And so how we're going to do that is through the Fenwood pilot project, is with incentive payments to achieve the water quality goals. And EPIC had a key role in developing this program. So we went to farmers, we went to our community, and we said, current cost share programs are not working. What kind of cost share program or incentive payment can we provide that's actually going to result in the outcome that we want of better water quality? And so we did just that on 5 farms in the Fenwood Creek watershed. And we did that using limited funds from the DNR, which is why we were only able to do that on 5 farms in the watershed. And so EPIC came up with this approach of having outcome-based incentives. So we're giving payments to farmers to see an outcome of better water quality in the watershed. We're not giving them cost share dollars for just implementing a practice and saying, okay, whatever happens, happens. We need to see that the results are coming off of these by implementing these practices. And so by having outcome-based incentive programs and a farm-wide approach, we're able to encourage farmer ingenuity by not being too prescriptive in what they need to do to get to those outcomes. Basically, the farmer has the power to make the changes on their farm to get to the reduction in phosphorus that were needed to see the water quality improvements. And so from going from good to great, we're basically going to make the playing field level for everybody. So everybody has to come to a basic standard of eligibility for performance. So that's those like nutrient management plan, addressing erosion on farm. Everybody has to have that basic standard. And then you go above and beyond, going from good to great by implementing additional superior farming practices on farm. And so this program is open to all farm sizes and management systems, which is really important because we need to see that cumulative effect. We need to have more than 5 farms. We need all 65 farmers to adopt this program to see superior farming practices on the land. And so this is a incentive-based on reduction. So the bigger the reduction, the bigger the payment. So anywhere from they can receive $20 to $40 per acre for up to 6 years based on how much they're able to reduce their phosphorus. So we're setting up these farms to be able to take on the challenge of changing their entire farming system, giving them incentive to make the change farm-wide. So that after those 6 years, they've adopted all the practices and they can just continue it after the program's done. And so we have an example of this. A young dairy farmer and his family, Keith Bauman, out in the Fenwood Creek watershed, he was able to achieve less than 1 pound per acre of phosphorus coming off of his farm, which is amazing. We don't see this from our Fenwood Creek farmers currently. So the fact that he was able to go from a conventional corn and bean system to implementing 100% no-till on his corn and soybeans, interseeding cover crops, so having year-round cover on his fields, no bare soil. Keith is seeing the improvements on his land by implementing all of these practices, and he's going to continue it even after the funds run out.
Cost efficiency. So hopefully when you hear terms like that, it is music to your ears because we do have a deal for you. There are ways to accomplish this through different methods. For example, wastewater treatment plants, when they try to remove phosphorus from the watershed, which they do every day, that costs them $200 a pound per year. So usually they do that through very expensive filters that cost millions of dollars. Our current strategy, which is very common amongst county land conservation departments in Wisconsin, we apply for individual grants from the DNR and other sources. So if someone's manure pit is leaking, we have to apply for a grant and wait a year to get $200,000 to fix that one small spot in the county. We call it like a shotgun approach. We take out single things as we see them. That's about 57 pounds a year. But this pilot project incentive, we have quantified that it will only spend $18 a pound a year on phosphorus runoff reduction. And we will continue to see cumulative results in the watershed. We will see less and less phosphorus leaving the watershed a year. $18 a pound is truly unheard of. I have not fact-checked this just to clear that, but that has got to be the lowest amount in the state of Wisconsin in terms of an approach to removing phosphorus from watersheds. So what will the outcome be of your investment? We believe that a successful demonstration pilot will lead to a wider adoption of this new model across Wisconsin. It's going to lead to further reductions of phosphorus runoff, and it's still going to support the needs that we have here in Marathon County of our vibrant agricultural economy. I talked in the beginning of the presentation about how Marathon County is continually a leader in the state with agriculture and conservation. We are confident that this one one-time investment from Marathon County will show the state of Wisconsin that this approach is worth adopting, and they will pick it up and they will roll it out on a larger scale. We have seen this happen again and again in conservation historically in Wisconsin. The non-metallic mining laws that exist in Wisconsin exist because Marathon County created local ordinances that say if you open a pit in Marathon County for mining, guess what? You have to reclaim it. Before Marathon County did that, people would leave an open pit and they would just leave it and abandon it and it would be done. But it took someone like Marathon County to develop a new and innovative approach. Trempealeau County developed an approach to barnyards, saying barnyards have to be regulated in Wisconsin. The lots that cattle are on cannot have runoff entering waters of the state. That was a new approach 25 years ago, and now every single county in the state of Wisconsin has to follow that approach. So we're confident that this approach is what the future of conservation in Wisconsin is. CPZ would, yes, this is my last sentence. CPZ would not seek ongoing funding from the county because of this approach. We are confident that since Wisconsin will continue to pick it up, that this one-time investment is all that's needed. And that is the end of our presentation. Are there any questions?
One of the concerns that I have is sustainability. If you create an incentive program, how do you continue that into the future? And the other question is proportionality. Is that one of the guidance we've received from the feds and from the Department of Treasury is that the expenditure funds needs to be proportionate to the population served. So can you address the issues of sustainability of this program and its likelihood to continue beyond this grant? And you're into 6 years and we can only fund through 2026. We have to complete our expenditures. And how would that work? You have staff. One of the goals also of this committee has been historically we don't want to incur expenses beyond the ARPA deadline. So how will that work?
Yeah, so with this incentive program, it is a 5-year program, and with our collaboration with EPIC, who gets farmers to adopt these conservation practices, they know from firsthand experience that it takes about 5 years for a farm to be able to implement and adopt and then carry on a practice. So this practice, if we're able to get that one-time investment in this, we're basically guaranteeing that moving forward, these 65 farmers are going to be at a higher level of farming in the county, and they're not going to need cost share dollars in the future within this watershed. And then moving forward, we would be looking for funding from additional sources from the state to broaden this out into all the watersheds across the county and the state possibly.
And there are ways, since we would be on a limited scale of time, there are ways to kind of have that money front-loaded in the time range. So for example, how we do nutrient management planning, cost sharing now in our department, people sign a contract that they will maintain that plan for 4 years, but we give them a one-time check at the beginning of the 4 years so that they have all the funds that they need to implement those practices, since there are costs associated with them. So even though we would be following and regulating these farms for 5 years, it is possible to set up payments just like how we currently do nutrient management planning, so it's spent within that time frame.
Chair Gibbs.
I've got several questions. So two things. I think, is there been, and I know there has been, discussion with the state and possible funding partner, and there was legislation introduced, I think by a senator from Eau Claire, to possibly provide funding for this project. And to be successful long-term from a state standpoint, you talked about not only this one tributary into the Eau Plaine, you got 11 additional in Marathon County alone. You also have additional upstream up in Taylor County and Clark County. Scalability is going to be a huge issue and you know, proportionately. And it's also going to require, at some point, possibly legislation change in the performance standards to require those standards. Right now, the farmers are meeting state standards. They're meeting all of the requirements they are, and yet we're not meeting the phosphorus you know, runoff need that we want. So there's a disconnect. And the disconnect is the state says we want this water quality, yet we're saying this is the standards for the farms, and that doesn't meet the standards. So can you help me understand how we're going to get to you know, and the discussion that the state has to be involved in as to a funding partner long-term, if we're going to move this to something scalable from statewide, and what that potential cost would be, and whether or not the state's even looking at that, or whether they're looking at legislation change.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, I really appreciate the background knowledge that you have in this area. Our department is hiring. If you're looking for a job as a conservationist,
I've got plenty of jobs already.
there's room for everyone in conservation, but it sounds like you've got the basis of what we do every day, so I appreciate that. I would just like to remind us that back in the 1990s in Wisconsin conservation, the state of Wisconsin spent money based on watershed. So each watershed, the size of Fenwood, oftentimes would receive between like $4 to $10 million. And every single farm got a manure pit. They all got barnyards. They all got, you know, contour strips put in on their farms. So it has been done before by Wisconsin on a much larger scale than what we are asking for right now. And so the scalability is already there. A lot of conservation practices, unfortunately, have a lifespan of about 20 years. So in Wisconsin right now, we are kind of at that point of a lot of the practices that were put in back when the DNR was fully funded and water in Wisconsin was fully funded. Those have kind of expired. And we had a huge bump in the road back in 2015 when corn prices went up and everyone tilled up all of, you know, the contour strips and things like that. So, you know, to kind of answer your question, the scalability is there because it has been done before. Also, even though we have polarization in the Wisconsin legislature, we can see that clean water has been a priority in the last couple of years. Right before COVID hit, there was so much momentum with the Clean Water Quality Task Force. I may have that title just a hair off, but there was a huge investment in time and money by our legislators traveling around the state, because I think there definitely is an awakening in Wisconsin that we do have a crisis related to groundwater and surface water in Wisconsin, and the time has come where we need to invest now before we hit a breaking point where there is no turning back. And so we feel that the time is right to start an innovative pilot program to show that for just $18 a pound an acre, which is pennies compared to the big picture of what municipalities are having to spend for their phosphorus problems, that this is the future. This is how we solve it based on very limited funds.
If I could just interject a question that's I think fundamental to how is this pandemic related, or how does it deal with people impacted by the pandemic, which is the purpose behind the American Rescue Plan funding?
So obviously in the pandemic, we've really started to understand how important outdoor spaces are to people. And when the Big O plain has blue-green algae blooms and people aren't able to recreate, use our parks, leads to decreased mental health and all of that, and less recreating, and poorer health of our citizens for those who still recreate on the water without knowing that it's impaired.
Just one other follow-up, and I know we have multiple programs in the department, in specifically seg funds and stuff for specific projects. What is the potential of an opportunity to, as you currently explained, the shotgun approach is not working and not solving those problems. And I know in historic numbers, I've seen cost-sharing projects go out as high as $800,000 for one farm, for one manure storage facility. What is the possibility of reallocating some of those funds and utilizing those in this pilot to actually accomplish something that we can show the state that this actually does work versus another $800,000 in a project that we're going to potentially tear out at some future point when that farmer closes up?
That is a wonderful idea, and I wish we could do things like that. The only grant in Wisconsin that exists for those $800,000 situations are the NOD, or Notice of Discharge grants from the Wisconsin DNR, and those are for the most extreme situations in Wisconsin. There's usually about a dozen farms a year in the entire state that are funded at those high levels because they have such an extreme resource concern happening on their farm. I worked on one a few years ago where they had the milk house waste pipe from their milk house going right into a trout stream, and it was a part of the trout stream labeled brook trout spawning area. So like those are the most extreme situations. So that pot of money that they have is a couple $1 million a year for those extreme farms. All of the other funding sources in Wisconsin are set up with very small limits. So either a $125,000 application for a single farm or $250,000 for a little bit larger situation. So right now, Wisconsin does not have the capacity to rearrange those funds at all. That is an innovative idea as well, but it's just not something that exists at this point in time.
Supervisor Leonard.
What do you have for the anticipation of cooperation rate with this, and what would be some of the barriers that a farmer might say, I'm out, I'm not going to cooperate?
Historically, in watersheds in Marathon County, the highest participation we've seen is 30% in watersheds. And that was back in the 1990s when we did have millions of dollars for each watershed. With this approach, we anticipate an 80% participation rate. And that is based on the rate of incentives and also, as Brooke mentioned, EPIC's involvement. Since it's a community-led watershed group, they would be the ones helping to take the lead in terms of outreach, communication, persuasion, et cetera. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I'm going to ask that we try to move. We've got about several other than one of our members has to leave, so.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any other questions, quick? All right, thank you. All right, we will now move on to the District Attorney's Office staffing.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Teresa Whetstone. I'm the District Attorney for Marathon County. I've been a prosecutor in Marathon County since 2002 and the elected District Attorney since 2016. And I hope there's not an expectation that I'm short because I'm really not known for that, but I will really try hard. So we have two requests before.
The length of the presentation determines the committee's
The success.
So talk faster. Okay.
Shorter the more successful.
All right. So I will make this short. I'm just kidding. So we have two requests before the committee. One is for legal assistant, paralegal, and 2 victim witness staff persons, as well as another request for a remodel of the victim witness area in the district attorney's office. So just a little bit of background for those of you who are not familiar with how the structure is of the district attorney's office. The prosecutors in our office are state employees, and the staff of the district attorney's office are county employees. So it is regulated by statute, and according to the statute, Marathon County is required, or counties are required to provide adequate and sufficient resources to fulfill the responsibilities of the district attorney's office. So the attorneys in the office are responsible for the review of referrals for all of the crimes that occur in Marathon County, whether committed by an adult or juvenile. And so we had actually, as far as these are several different positions, but starting with victim witness, we had actually brought to the attention of the county board concerns of sufficiency of victim witness staffing in 2019 through that budget process. And at that point in time, we were the 7th worst in the state as far as staffing for victim witness and the ability to meet the needs of victims and witnesses who come through the criminal justice system. So as a basic understanding, statutorily, we are required as a district attorney's office to provide victims with information as it relates to the criminal justice system and support, and that is heightened by Marsy's law, which came into effect during the pandemic, which was horrible timing, but so that was post-2019. And Marsy's law is a constitutional amendment that really solidifies victims' rights, and it starts at the point of victimization. So what Marsy's law did is it really drew attention to the need to enforce victims' rights, give an avenue for victims to be involved in the criminal justice system and informed at the earliest point of victimization. And what that did for our victim witness staff is normally we did not, in all cases except for sensitive crimes, contact, for example, a victim at the point when the case was coming first before the court at the initial appearance. So initial appearances for crimes happen every single day for people who are arrested or bonded out, and then once a week for summons in. So now with Marsy's law, for example, our victims are entitled to know that that individual is coming, that defendant is coming before the court at the initial appearance, and that bond is going to be set at that initial appearance, and they have a right to be heard now at that initial appearance. That is new. So you think about all the cases, we open between 5,000 and 6,000 cases a year. Not all of them involve victims, but a significant portion do. So our victim witness staff is responsible for contacting victims by phone and saying, hey, look, the person's going to appear today. You have a right to make a statement regarding bond, concerning your safety or concerns that you have. That is something new. We didn't get additional staffing with that. So I just wanted to, I guess, point out that that's not a new request. Unfortunately, we just lost a staff member to another position who she was actually not a new grad. She was working with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in her previous position, and she actually took a pay cut to come work in our office, and she was moving up in the ranks where she was at, and she did not last very long in our office and said that she could not handle the workload of this position, and so we are currently hiring, so it would be great to be able to hire for an ARPA position or two as well. So as I stated, the prosecutors are state employees. The governor reviewed the needs of the criminal justice system after the pandemic. So the courts were basically shut down for jury trials for just under 12 months. The district attorney's office quickly pivoted, and we found a way to function in all ways and keep our case processing going during the pandemic, except for jury trials. We did have a backlog before the pandemic, and obviously the pandemic exacerbated that. So the governor's office, without consultation with the district attorney's offices around the state, on their own, assessed the needs of the DA's offices to deal with that backlog from the pandemic and allocated to Marathon County 2 prosecutor positions to deal with the backlog. For 2 years. Those positions last for 2 years. We just hired for one of the positions. We're very excited about our new hire. But what that means is if we're going to try to push these cases forward at an unprecedented rate, make sure that we are honoring victims' rights, making sure that we have the support for the attorneys to have the cases ready to go when it's time to go to trial, that they're prepared to limit the delays as much as possible, and because the cases are prepared, we're going to require staff to support those 2 positions for the prosecutors that we received. The paralegal position, just to touch on the other positions, and the legal assistant. So the paralegal position, these cases that we're dealing with, so we also had, at the same time, an unprecedented number of homicide cases in our office and high-level felonies in our office. The homicide cases, and CCIT can attest to this, the volume of materials in these cases it's just out of this world. We are overwhelming the CCIT storage capacity. The trial I just did last fall was over 12,000 pages of written police reports. That's without the recordings and all the digital media to review. So the paralegal is critical to getting that information organized and getting that information to our victim witness personnel to make sure we get notices out to victims. We're also stacking cases on top of each other. So there are multiple trials that are set at the same time, and then they work their way down. So we have to get that information to our victim witness staff so they can notify victims and witnesses of the need to come to trial. So the paralegal really does that higher level work to make sure everything is in place. And then obviously the legal assistant is responsible for getting out all the discoverable materials. We need to redact information to ensure that victims' personal information is not provided to defense as much as possible, to treat victims with fairness, dignity, and respect, which is the constitutional amendment. So that's really the support for the two attorneys. As far as the remodel is concerned, the pandemic really brought to the forefront some of the issues with the structure of our office. Our office is set up that our victim witness staff is upstairs along with our district attorney's office investigators, and then our attorneys are downstairs. The way it's currently set up is that all of the victims and witnesses, imagine there's a trial or a long hearing. Many times we have individuals who don't necessarily get along with each other, and we need to provide them an area to wait, a comfortable area, a private area, and that's within the district attorney's office. So they come into the secure area of the district attorney's office. Sometimes our victims of crime have also been defendants. Sometimes our victims of crime are family members who don't get along with each other. We have to provide a supportive, comfortable environment for individuals regardless of all that. So that right now they have to come into the district attorney's office and they go into a room that we're unable to monitor because you have to go around a corner. And we also have victim witness staff there who are dealing with other people who have sensitive crimes that they do not wish individuals to hear about. And we're having other meetings going on. We have very limited space for that. So the remodel allows us to have sufficient office space as well as provide a secure access to that victim witness area. And in viewing, there's also ability of our DA office investigator to view into that room to make sure that everything is safe and secure, and it would be separated by a wall from our other victim witness staff for the privacy and security of other individuals as well. So we were very happy with working with facilities. They were wonderful in trying to help us develop this, to use the space that we have in a more efficient manner. And I think that was it, really, in a nutshell. Tried to condense it as much as I could. Yeah.
A question, and I'm supportive of the initiative, but in light of the backlog and in discussions that I've had with judges, they're booked 2 years out.
Right.
And there's the public defender component. If we accelerate our capacity, what happens if the system can't absorb the capacity?
And that, yes, that is a real concern. We're the starting point of cases. We initiate the cases. So if we bring more cases in, you're exactly right. If we can't get them resolved, then it's not going to move the backlog. But in order for us to move cases forward, we have to have a prosecutor who's reviewing it to get the discoverable material, all the police reports, all the recordings, and all those things out to the defense attorney in a timely manner as soon as that person is appointed as an attorney or assigned as an attorney. And then when it's able to be scheduled for trial, we have to be ready to go. And I understand it's not going to take care of all the problems in the system, that's for sure. But I think it's a necessary component. So even if you had sufficient number of public defenders, but you didn't have a sufficient number of prosecutors, then you're not going to move cases either, right? So this is our part, I guess, in trying to get that backlog resolved.
And then is the expectation that some of these positions will sunset at the end of the ARPA funding, or will it be an expectation the county pick them up?
So the one position that we have put in a request for is the victim witness specialist position that we.
Permanent.
Permanent, yes. For transparency's sake, the victim witness positions are supplemented by Chapter 950, which is the statute, funds through the state. If it is a full-time permanent position, like we've requested, then the state will use those Chapter 950, which are victim witness fees, to pay a part of the victim witness position. In order for us to be eligible, the state has to agree that our county has a need. They have agreed that our county has a need. We have only requested that need as to one position, but I believe they probably would support two for our county. But if we go through the ARPA funding, I do not believe that those Chapter 950 funds would be coming from the state to help offset the cost of that position. So that is a downside of not having the use of those funds, but the only way those funds are available is if a permanent position is approved. So just to be transparent on that. The other positions, the prosecutor positions are only for 2 years. So the support for those positions, we understand, would not be sustained after the 2 years. The victim witness position is really the request.
Mayor Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Teresa, I think, sitting on the CJCC and understanding the total system, my questions are similar to what John is, and that is, court time, defense attorneys, clerk of courts, court recorders, court reporters, and recording are all part of the problem. And so I understand your component to it, but I think we need to look more holistically. If we're going to solve the situation, we need to look at all parts of that, because if we're still going to have one bottleneck, and that bottleneck, we brought all the staff that you need to the picture, and there's still a bottleneck, and that's the defense attorneys or the court time or something else, then we're not going to solve the whole problem. So we need to solve the whole problem, and I appreciate your bringing this forward, but I think we need to look at the picture in the big scope rather than just one bit and piece. And I really do think that a challenge of using one-time funding for ongoing positions is really challenging, but that's for the witness specialist. But I appreciate the information. But so I think the question is, how do we look at this from a holistic standpoint to identify the shortfalls and potentially the clerk of court's office, the defense attorneys and court time and or court recorders, because it's all critical. Without any one component, we're not going to solve the backlog.
And I think that one thing to keep in mind as well, first of all, the two prosecutors are coming. They're here. They're already allocated through the state. So we need the support for those prosecutors. But the courts we're not adding courts. So we're just, and the court reporters are present as employees from 8 to 4:30 here right now. So they, as much as the capacity can be had with our current resources, it would be using our current resources to the fullest capacity within the court system. So we're not adding another branch to supply. We're trying to get these cases moving through as efficiently as possible. The one part of that I think is, and I'm certainly not speaking for the clerk of courts or the judges, but the one part about that is the public defender's office, and I actually sent an email to today, I think there are efficiencies that we can have to cut down on some of the ease in which public defenders are, or defense attorneys, I shouldn't say public defenders, defense attorneys are withdrawing from cases, the lack of accountability for moving cases forward, the amount of times that they don't have things done timely, they aren't showing up, like there are efficiencies that we can put forth in this system that we're not doing. And it's really frustrating. And we are setting the bar so low at this point, it's like we need to raise the bar and people will meet it. And if they don't meet it, then maybe they don't need to be taking cases in this county because actually they're kind of more of a liability than they are helping the system. But there are things that can be done to address some of the failings of the system in that regard that aren't being done. So I feel very strongly about it. We've had very animated conversations about that. So there's a shortage, but there's also inefficiencies that are not being addressed.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Teresa, your question or your statement about the $950, if it's a full-time allocated position but funded with ARPA dollars through the period which ARPA can be used, is it your understanding that the state would use their $950 as the state match or not?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
That's the best
It's got to be
answer
funded
that we've
with,
gotten, yes.
it's got to be funded with county levy to trigger the match.
So we could transition that position into a victim witness position into a full-time position with those $950, which is between 40% and 60% of the position cost at that point when the ARPA funding was gone.
Okay. But if we utilized county levy for the victim witness position, we would trigger the,
Chapter 950.
even if we did that within your budget by moving something else onto ARPA for at least the period of through 2026.
Yes, you could do that.
So we could supplant and at least
And
get
pull down
40
40 or
It
60%.
is between 40 and
950,
60%.
yeah.
And they're trying to supplement that at the state level. There's an initiative to try to get that at a higher percentage. But that is approved at the state level for a victim witness position, but not through the county.
Can we check with the state and see if we would be allocated a second witness?
Sure.
I mean, to your point, Administrator, if the state doesn't allocate us a second witness coordinator, victim witness coordinator, or specialist, we couldn't draw the $950 if we even paid for it out of tax levy. But if the state,
For one, for sure. For second, I can.
oh, but we already have one, correct? That's drawing $950?
It would be one additional.
Oh.
Yes, for the additional. We have approval for the additional position.
Oh, we have approval for one
the
additional for sure?
position.
But is there a possibility of two?
Yes,
Can we check on that?
yes, absolutely.
Because that would make a big difference as to which way I think that we would try to find the funding.
Sure.
Because it makes more sense to actually get the $950 fully through,
Right.
starting from beginning, if the plan is to keep them in place.
Right, yes. We do have approval for the additional position, and the sense that our victim witness coordinator has is that if we ask, they will have the approval for the second based on our need as
Okay.
calculated by the state.
Other questions? Matt, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. For Regional Forensic Science Center project.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Blahnik. I am the Marathon County Medical Examiner. I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. If anyone has more questions on this project after the meeting, I'd be happy to help address them at any time because it is a very complex project. So just wanted to let you know, by approval of allocating these funds for the project, you're not approving the project, and we would also need to find the other funding for the funding to go through the ARPA funds. We just wanted that money allocated now to help us obtain other funding for the sources. So the Regional Forensic Science Center project has been going on since 2017 when we created the Morgue Task Force. There are many issues within the forensic science community and also within our office that this project would address. The main issues are there's no local autopsy providers within north central Wisconsin. All of the local autopsy providers are in the southern part of the state. All of our healthcare systems have also stopped providing medical autopsies to coroner medical examiner offices and families as needed. With that, Marshall Medical Center does do a few internal, but Aspirus does not have any autopsy provider services, so all of those cases are traveling down to Madison as well. So there is a huge regional need for this type of facility. The other issue that we have within our office is that we are not able to successfully manage a mass fatality or a surge of death situation. So if we were to have another pandemic, we may not be able to handle the surge of deaths at that moment. There were many times within this last pandemic that the funeral homes were taxed, the healthcare facilities were beyond tax, our office was taxed, as well as the entire region. We, at one point, needed to look for different solutions. Luckily, we never had to use our refrigerated truck, which I'm very happy about, but there were a lot of issues that we address as we move forward. Our office was also identified as one of the key facilities and partners throughout the region for mass fatality preparedness and to helping deal with a pandemic. We had over 600 COVID fatalities come through our office throughout that time, so we're heavily involved in that type of situation. This type of facility would tremendously help all of those aspects, plus have so many more community benefits, a better service to the families. We want to be a huge teaching facility, so it's a really exciting project that's going to really help the region. A little bit of background, we've been working with Whiffley Consulting Services on our business plan. We just got the business plan updated actually this afternoon, so the second version is available at this time, which we'd be happy to share with everyone. As part of the business plan, we did a huge feasibility study to see the need of the facility. So far, 19 Wisconsin counties have expressed interest in utilizing our facility for autopsy services. Both healthcare systems, Aspirus and Marshall Clinic, had expressed interest, as well as counties in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan. So we do have quite a bit of counties committed to utilizing our services, which is a revenue that comes through our office that would offset all operational costs. That the facility is operations neutral. Well, actually, we would be having some revenues. The latest with inflation is a little bit not as good as the last plan without inflation, but we would be getting $8,000 to $107,000 in revenue per year by this facility, which is good that we are over operations neutral. The only issue is that we are not able to cover the construction costs of the facility. Unfortunately, right now is a difficult time for construction, as you heard earlier, and inflation costs have gone up. So our facility construction cost estimates are now $7.4 to $10 million. There is a large range between that, is that they have a minimum and a maximum amount that they had for what they estimated for the cost of square footage. And then we also have 3 different facility designs. The first facility design is a very bare minimum basic facility that starts at $7.4 million. The secondary design is a midline one that has a teaching space added for the medical students of the Medical College of Wisconsin, but not a lot of other additions. And then the larger facility has a larger conference room to accommodate teaching partnership with North Central Technical College, who wants to be one of our main community partners, and also an autopsy observation area that would be utilized by both medical students and North Central Technical College students between the health science programs and also the public safety programs. A lot of the teaching would greatly improve death investigation services throughout the state, as well as law enforcement services and healthcare services. So the ask is for $2 million, and then we will work on other means to raise the rest of the funding for the facility. And if we do not raise those funds within the next year, those funds would be able to be reallocated to another project at that time, that there's plenty of time within the deadlines of the ARPA grant. Anything else? Oh, sorry, Craig couldn't make it. He had a different appointment at this time.
I have a question relative to the design of it. Are we setting the morgue up as an enterprise account with the ability to recoup depreciation so that when we have the need to upgrade facilities in the future, we build that into the rate that we charge other entities? I know that we were talking about operational and maintenance issues, but I'm concerned about long-term capital replacement.
This is Administrator Leonard. I can take that. We haven't had the discussion of whether we truly run it as an enterprise fund, but if you look at the business plan, it's not set up currently to fund depreciation. That is one of the things that is very attractive about the potential partnership with North Central Technical College and locating that on their campus, that at least all of the building envelope and exterior grounds would be the responsibility of North Central Technical College, because with that partnership would come revenues for NTC. I can also tell you that just earlier today, I think each of the last probably 3 days in a row, I've had a call with Senator Petrusky, and he's having conversations with state representatives, both at the Department of Justice and in the governor's office. As Jessica alluded to, and I apologize, I stepped out for a bit, but the idea here is to encumber the funds or to allocate the funds, but not to truly spend them. So we'll, as Jess said, if the project doesn't come to fruition, that's one way the funds could be reallocated to another project. But the recommendation from public safety is to at least allocate them toward the project. If the project doesn't come to fruition, the funds would be returned. Conversely, if we're able to get all of the funds through either the state or even the federal government, which I had a conversation with Wisconsin Counties Association earlier last week about that, pursuing the potential for dollars on the federal side. As Jess alluded to in her presentation, there's a lot of partnership opportunities here. But to your point, we're looking at innovative ways to try to fund the ongoing capital costs. The sticking point to this point has been truly funding the debt service, or in your mind, in funding the depreciation.
Are there other questions?
I would just like to add, the hardest, working on this for the last few years, the biggest struggle we have is a lot of these community foundations or other governmental agencies are a little bit more hesitant to provide or allocate funds for Marathon County if Marathon County does not have any funds allocated for the project. Even if we have these funds allocated, it at least shows that Marathon County is committed to the success of this project, and it gets other agencies more willing to donate and to contribute. So it would be helpful for our fundraising efforts.
Cody?
That kind of leads into my question. Is this funding anything in particular, or is this just like you said, it's going to help promote funding for other places?
So the funding would be towards the construction cost if it goes that direction. So like I said, we have 3 different levels as to the facility of more the basic one. At the bare minimum, I think the mid-grade one would be the least that we'd want to do, since it does have the teaching facility space, which I have the sheets right here. That one is 8.8 million to 9.2 million. And then hopefully if we get more funding, then we won't need the funds from this. So we would see what we get and how things go.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll call on the Parks Department for the Big O Plain, Eau Claire, Dells of Eau Claire, and the 9 Mile Chalet.
All right, thank you, members of the committee. I will, everyone said they'd keep it brief so far, but I will really try to lump them all together. So the projects that I'm bringing forward to you today, the Big O Plain shower facility, the Dells of Eau Claire shower and restroom facility, among other things, and the 9 Mile chalet renovations are basically the biggest need for those is looking at the sustainability of our department and trying to reduce our department from being on tax levy, but also to address the issues that we've seen during the pandemic in the last 2 years and the amount of usage in the parks. I know the CPZ staff mentioned that was one of the items for Big O Plain was the usage of the parks and the number of people that we had. Our camping has been our biggest source of revenue other than our timber sales over the last couple of years. Through the pandemic has really gone up. We went up 63% from 19 to 20 and another 18% from 20 to 21. There's still high today. I don't have a figure as what we're at today, but we're just as busy as we were last year, and we're seeing the same amount of camping happen. All of our facilities that we have at the Big O Plain and the Dells of Eau Claire right now are only pit toilets. So that's all we offer our campers as far as amenities, in addition to, I guess, the electric is a big one. So we did upgrade our electric service in both of those campgrounds over the last couple of years to 50 amp services because people are bringing in larger campers. They do have their own air conditioning and TVs and stuff in there, and that's been a big draw. So we have seen more campers come in because of that increased electrical service. One of the requests that we do get very often is at least toilets, the running water for toilets. The showers are an added amenity. You know, my family and I, when we go camping, we don't have showers. We usually go to a lake somewhere. If the Big O Plain isn't clean, then that's not really an option for them, and the Eau Claire River is not really either. But to enhance our camper experience, to enhance the quality of life for our residents and for those visiting from out of state, this is an amenity that we can add to our campgrounds that will give them clean, potable water. That's the other part of these requests, is that in all of those parks, all we have right now for potable water is our old hand pumps. And they meet code, other than one we did have to close down this year. We have to have it clean because we had some E. coli in that one, but they are aged facilities. They've been there for many, many years. We are going to be looking to replace the pump itself to give it more efficiency, but that's the potable water that we provide to our campers by code. If we had the ability to put in well water for these restroom facilities or shower facilities, we'd have an additional source of potable water that would be up to code for our campers to have. And the camping code is very clear on, in order to run a campground, you have to have water within so many feet. You have to have a restroom within so many feet of campers. So this would enhance that. We do meet code as we are today, but as our wells age, potable water might become an issue for us. The only facility we do have a shower and restroom facility is in Marathon Park, and that one is used quite often by our campers. They get a code, and it's a draw to that park being in the middle of Wausau. So that's the ask for the Big O Plain and the Dells of Eau Claire. The additional 2 items at the Dells of Eau Claire to increase the camper experience is the camper cabins, a different amenity that we currently do not offer in Marathon County, but many other counties and state parks are now offering. Just a very small 10 by 10 cabin, and you can charge usually a larger rate for those. Even with the addition of water, infrastructure, and showers, we can increase our camping rates by a certain amount to increase our revenue in those facilities. The other thing that right now we currently don't meet code at in Dells of Eau Claire is we do not have a dump station for our campers. By code, you are supposed to have a dump station within so many miles of a campground or have an agreement with another facility that has a dump station. We have gotten grandfathered in over the years to say that we have Marathon Park as the closest dump station. It is outside of the range that's acceptable, but they've allowed that to happen because there is also a private campground in the town of Hatley, I believe, that has a dump station as well. We don't have a formal agreement with them, but many campers can go that direction. So the addition of the dump station is what we add at to meet code at the Dells of Eau Claire. So those, I can answer questions on the campgrounds first, because 9 Mile is a little bit different.
So what will the pricing structure be, and will we be pricing camping out of the range for low-income families?
I anticipate that our campgrounds, we would gradually increase based on the infrastructure that's there. Right now, our campgrounds range anywhere from $16 a night to $24 a night, I believe, based on whether it has electric, non-electric, if it's a waterfront, non-waterfront, so we have a couple of different options. I would think that we could increase our rates by maybe $2 to $3 to begin with. And look at that. We would definitely, before implementing that fee structure, compare to our other local counties, like Clark County it did a bathroom facility a few years ago, and that's where I've gotten a lot of my dollars based on for this project, is for what they put in there and what their rates are. So we are a little bit lower than some of those now. We do have room to move, not price ourselves out, but it would be gradual.
Cody?
So earlier we were talking about the Oak Plain Watershed, and then we all know that there's supposed to be a sulfite mine going up, well, proposed sulfite mine up in the Eau Claire Dells area. Do either of those have an impact on visitors and potentially on revenue in the future if water quality is low up there?
To start with the mining, that I do not believe that would have an effect on the Eau Claire Dells. It's downriver from there, and it doesn't really have any proximity much to the park. The watershed of the Bago Plain does have an impact on why people come to the Bago Plain. You know, they come, some of them come just to camp and to bike. Our trails are nice out there, a horseback ride. Others do come to put their boat in and fish or do water sports. So we do have jet skiers that come in. So I do think people do plan some of their trips around the water quality and how high the river is in that area. Mm-hmm.
Other questions on this one? If not, if you want to move on to the
Okay.
9 Mile.
So the 9 Mile renovation and infrastructure work. Oh yeah, there we go. Let's go down to it. The 9 Mile renovation and infrastructure is based on the ability to provide adequate services for the uses that are currently at 9 Mile. 9 Mile, even though it's a county forest, it has become one of our most cherished county forests that we have. It provides daily activities for biking, hiking, mountain biking, or I already said that, mountain biking, horseback riding, as well as the cross-country ski and snowshoe facilities in the winter. And it has become home of many events. We do have a 9 Mile event policy where we restrict the number of events just so we don't take away from the daily user because it is so heavily used. But we have the ability to hold big events. We have secured a contract with Ragnar. We just renewed another 3 years with them. That's a really large event. We have the WASA 24. We have the area high school cross-country races. We have other bike races. We have the Badger State Games. We have numerous ski races in the winter. So one of the things we have found is that the sewer infrastructure that we have at 9 Mile is not adequate for even our daily uses now when it's heavily used, like during the winter, mainly during ski season. We get some backups in there. It's just it's a too small system for the number of users that we have out there. During those large events, we rarely even let them in the building. We require them to bring in their own porta potties, like for Ragnar and stuff like that, because we don't have the capacity to keep up with the number of users that are coming into the facility. So this is really to look at the 9 Mile chalet area and all the uses and to adequately size that drain field and the septic system out there to maybe not accommodate a Ragnar because that's a once in a year event. We have a couple out there, but to at least increase it to accommodate our daily uses that we have during our regular season. We do also have Nordic Ski Club that is looking and has been looking for years to add snowmaking out there. That still is something that we are pursuing with them. We are going to be allowing a trial season this year, or it's coming still through the system, to allow a trial season for winter fat tire biking, which adds another use in the winter for this next year. So this is something that we feel by upgrading these facilities, at least the water and sewer facilities, that we can increase also the rental price of our facilities. If we can allow these events to use the running water in the facilities within the chalet, then we can increase those rental rates of those facilities as well. The other part of this that we have put in here, which is an add-on as long as we're doing some work to 9 Mile, is what we feel is beneficial, is just bringing the chalet up to a more modern type feel with more energy efficiency. We do have a really good heating system out there with the pellet heating big tank that we put out there a few years ago, and it's worked wonderful. That would remain the same, but the inside structure of the facility could be renovated just a little bit. I don't anticipate any major renovations, but maybe new windows, new tiling, a new location area where people can gather that allows them to do registrations for these events. It'll also, by doing that, would increase the ability to add the fees on to those renters and even charge more for our daily uses or our season passes for those added amenities that they currently don't have. We do have a couple of pit toilets out there that we do have available as well, and those would not change, but this would be more use of the chalet year-round. Right now it's mainly a winter facility, but it really could be used and should be used year-round for rentals and events if it could handle it.
So as you embark upon these improvements, are you looking at all at creating a depreciation fund or to be able to replace in support capital expenses in the future?
We could, so 9 Mile right now is currently an enterprise fund, although capital projects are not part of that enterprise fund. They are usually funded through the CIP process.
Then it is not an enterprise fund.
Right, well, okay, yes, by definition is not an enterprise fund. But the operations, besides and we haven't done a lot of capital projects out there, so I'm not really sure what our capital debt is. I guess I'd have to look at that. But we would hope that we would increase revenue, especially as we look at the snowmaking portion of it to bring more users here, that we begin to build up that revenue over the expenditures to start, yes, having that type of a pot to work from.
Other questions? Bert?
Just one, and I failed to ask on the DA's remodel. These are all, Jamie, great potential projects, yet they're all CIP projects, and we didn't want to circumvent the CIP process. Are these being also run through the CIP and potentially can still be funded with ARPA funds, but still run through the CIP process?
Well, I didn't put them in as CIP projects, but talking with Administrator Leonard, that's what we had thought would happen with this, so that they would go through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Not, thank you. Next, we'll call on library. And Jim, we saved the best for last.
The biggest, that's for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for considering the project request.
You'll need to stay because we're recording.
I'm just going to pass these out. They're hypothetical, just to get an idea of what it might look like. Thank you. So I'll be short and sweet. So Highway can take the floor. Our ARPA request is fairly straightforward. We're really looking for yet another CIP project that I did discuss briefly with Lance about possibly putting on the CIP project list, but it's for the library's 3rd floor. So when the library was built, or rebuilt, I should say, they put the 3rd floor in because they could do it at about the same cost as just doing the first 2 floors. And it was left unfinished. So right now we don't have HVAC up there, and there's like insulation sprayed on the walls but hasn't been drywalled over, and our ceilings are exposed. So we haven't been able to use those to the public because it's not temperature controlled. I think it's particularly pertinent right now in light of COVID. A lot of people in the community have lost their jobs. They've lost ways of making money. And so what we're hoping to do, and you'll see in that draft, which like I said is very hypothetical, it's just an idea of what we could use with the space, create opportunities for our community members to develop skills, to have virtual interview spaces that are private, to have a production studio where they could create videos for entrepreneurship or starting a YouTube channel, same with a recording studio, all of these would be free to the public and be able to be rented out kind of like our study rooms. So that's the hope and the interest in it. Our library board has been trying to find, value-added purpose for that third floor for a long time. We're in the unique, lucky situation that we have a lot of space. A lot of times libraries don't have the space, but we do. We just need it to be, safe and functioning and up to code and able to be used so that the public can access it. This project has been have been completed since I think about '93 was when I found the earliest paperwork where they were looking for doing the HVAC upstairs on the third floor and finishing those walls. But like I said, now we have a purpose for it. We've got some added value for our community members and some services that we can add to the library's roster of what we do. So yeah, I mean, that's in a nutshell. Also, I'd like to say that the ARPA request is just for the HVAC and finishing the walls and ceiling. Any equipment that would be needed for these added services, I've already sort of telegraphed to the Library Foundation, and that's a way to keep our equipment sustainable. A lot of times libraries will get grant funding for like a maker space, and then the grant is spent out, and then you end up with old equipment that nobody wants to use. But we have a fairly robust foundation, and our endowments are good enough where we can keep on putting in new equipment. So if we had a production studio and people wanted to use it, they couldn't afford to have their own camera equipment. We have a green screen, those kinds of things. Once it needs to be refreshed with new technology, our foundation could continue to support that. So this ARPA request is just for a one-time, finish the third floor so that it can be usable and adding services to our public.
So the chamber is in the process of updating their facilities and moving. Have you coordinated with them?
Yeah, actually, I met with Dave Ekman from the chamber. He was the one who recommended the drone site. We've got really high ceilings there, and there's nowhere else in Marathon County where people can do the training to get certified to, fly their drones for camera purposes and business purposes. So I did talk to him, and we talked about what he's planning on offering in their space and what they won't have. A lot of pieces of this too go together. So if we have classes and things like that and do initial trainings or initial education on certain avenues like production studio, if they wanted to take that further and develop it further, they could go to the chamber and they might have facilities that are a little bit more in depth. Also, the floor of the third floor is not the same weight bearing as our other floors. Obviously, the first and second floor have to be heavy weight bearing because we have stacks of books. The third floor was meant to be only office space, so we can't have huge equipment like a CNC machine or things like that, but we can have things like a production studio. It would be enough weight bearing to qualify and be safe.
Other questions? Ann?
Would you be adding library staff, or how does this get, or is it just a room that I could come in and use the equipment, or who helps me figure out the equipment?
That's an excellent question. It would not add staff. It would be the same as, like I said, reserving a study room. So it would be use on your own. You would sign an agreement when you use the space, and then we would check you in, and you could reserve it for a certain amount of time. And so we would let you into the equipment. We would have probably like classes or programs that might teach you how to use the equipment should you want to come in or you don't know how to use it, like for the production studio or the recording studio. But we do that kind of programming all the time anyhow. So it would be teaching the program maybe once a month or twice a month, depending on how busy or how big the demand is. And then you could reserve it at your own time, and we would let you into the room to use the space.
Other questions? Cody?
And I think we talked about this a little bit with partnering with the chamber, but so a lot of these rooms, these are all things that don't already exist in the community, right? Like there's a specific need for all of these things, correct?
That's right, and that is the reason why I met with Dave Ekman, just to see what he was creating. And the production studio, we already currently have the equipment because during the pandemic, we did some virtual story time. So like I said, it could be refreshed by foundation funds, but that's something that doesn't exist anywhere. You can't go in, you know, aside from using your phone, you couldn't make a high quality YouTube video, for example, unless you came and used our equipment in the area as far as I know.
Then I had one more question. And then one more question, just because it's an HVAC system, and for every time we get HVAC, for ARPA funds, I'm going to ask if it's going to have air purification, just because these are supposed to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, and that would mean making sure there's no more spread or no more new pandemics.
Absolutely. Air quality is very important to us. Lance and I talked briefly. There may be opportunities to, so go ahead. get a
Sure.
HVAC.
Like, I'm probably going to steal Chair Robinson's thunder or Board Chair Gibbs. The plan would be to have this go through the capital planning process as well and have it flushed out there in terms of details on what that would look like. I did speak briefly with Facilities Director Kaiser, and we've been talking a little bit about what options might exist for HVAC improvements. And in fact, I believe they have on the 5-year CIP plan replacement with respect to floors 1 and 2 of the HVAC. So timing actually is with us on this one, as opposed to some of the previous construction projects that you've heard about yet today.
Kurt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the challenges with the third floor, especially if we want to make it open and available to the public at various times that potentially may not coincide with the library's opening, was access to that third floor. And has that been looked at, or does this address any of those challenges, or as a separate entrance and a separate utilization?
Well, that's a good question. When we were looking at the third floor space as a possible for the Children's Museum, that would be a separate entity and would need a separate entrance. These would be all services accessible during library hours, just like any of our other services, and be supported by the staff. So, and I think it's actually a good thing that it's not just an open entrance, like our grand stairwell can take you to the first floor, can take you to the second floor, and all of those are accessible. Because we'll have expensive equipment up there, having reservations and letting people in, via swipe for the elevator is probably prudent. But I know what you're talking about, and if it were a separate entity, if it were another, we did think about having possibly like the Literacy Center or something like that, because there's so much space up there. I mean, it's over 10,000 square feet, I think, from old things. Then they would maybe need their own separate access, but because would be library services provided by library staff, I don't think that comes into the picture.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, you've got till 5 o'clock.
30 seconds more, I'm gonna need. Thank you, Chair Robinson, and thank you for putting me 10th out of 10th on the agenda.
I will share that responsibility with the administrator.
So my 4-year program has 16 projects in it. I believe I get 10 minutes for each 16 projects.
Yep.
You can try.
I will make it a lot shorter than that. So the spreadsheet you see is projects that are above and beyond our normal paving program. We normally go out there and pave about 30 miles a year. These are above those. If you look at the projects for 2023, those projects were already submitted into the CIP request, but we talking to Mr. Leonard, we decided to go both routes with these here. So the projects for 2023, you'll see on there, are a variety of different roadway projects, and those happen to be all roadway projects on there. The ones that are with the asterisk, the BIL, Those are the bipartisan infrastructure law. We do not have secured any funding for those. We submitted the projects in the first round. We were not accepted. We submitted for the June 3rd deadline. We should be finding out on April 1st if just not those projects, but any of the projects on this spreadsheet with the BIL, if we'll be receiving that funding. Again, we'll be finding out August 1st. I talked to the Secretary's office about the importance of letting us know by August 1st so we can get that into the 2023 budget. There's a lot of numbers on there, a lot of big numbers. The good news about these numbers is majorities are 80-20 splits. If you look at the cost of the overall project, most times on these, we're only paying 20%. The County Junk Highway K project that is happening next year, there is some other funding out there that's the MLS funding, the multimodal project. That was only 50% funding, so it's a combination of projects out there of 8.6 million. That one, our county funding be 4.3, roughly half. So that's the good news. Most of these are an 80-20 split. The bad news is a lot of these projects, a lot of these applications, they're done 2 or 3 years ago. Bridge projects, I'm submitting 5 years in advance. So when I did those, I did not foresee $5, $6 fuel. I did not foresee asphalt prices, what they're at. So, we may be short on those. That 80-20 is a hard cap. And what I mean by the hard cap is not the 80-20, it's the funding that I applied for at the point of the application. So if I applied for the 80%, if the project goes up, there is a possibility if it goes up more than 10%, I can ask for change management and get more state or federal dollars. But again, we won't know those until the projects come up. The other good news is, when we receive all this funding, you heard Chair Robertson probably talk about this numerous times, is our GTA, our gas revenue that we get. The more money we spend, our 6-year average rolling goes up, the more GTA we can receive. The cap on that is 15%. So if we would go crazy and, let's say we did $35 million all of next year, the most we can go up is 15% in the GTA funding per year. Currently, we're at $3.1 million. There's 71 other counties out there, so we can't really project exactly what's going to happen because that denominator is going to change with all the other counties doing projects. But let's say we would go up 15%, we would go from $3.1 to $3.5 million, probably about $3.55 million in our GTA. So that helps us out on the back end. Again, one of the big project in there is the County Junk Highway K project. We are committed to that project at this point for next year. So somehow we need to figure out how to fund that project. We also have done a transportation plan at the Highway Department. It's a 30-year plan. There shows a huge gap between our needs and our funding. So at some point, that gap gets larger and larger. If you look out 30 years, that's just a number that people probably say, well, 2050. But if you just look out 2 years from now, that funding gap is already close to $1 million in that funding gap out 2 years. So we need to keep increasing our funding for our highway projects, or that gap's just going to get larger and larger. Again, there's about $35.5 million worth of project in the 4 years out there, above and beyond our paving program, but $35.5 million, our cost of Marathon County is $10.3 million, so that's a good deal. If we can start getting that type of revenue sharing with the state and federal government. So that's all I had, and at this point, I'll take any questions.
Any questions, Kurt?
The infrastructure legislation, that we don't know, there's a fair amount of projects that you've submitted for that. When will we know, and is it only, are we going to be notified for 2023's projects, or, and then reapply for 2024's projects? Or?
We'll know August, they told me, and I talked to the Secretary's office, Craig, and he said they'll let us know by August 1st, at least the first week of August, for all the programs, for all the way through, every one I put in through all the way through 26. So we'll know right away at that point. The other thing to note is, you'll notice there's a lot of different programs out there. You'll see a lot of acronyms. But the STP Rural and STP Bridge is kind of our major funding. Again, talking to people in the industry and talking to Transportation Director Craig Thompson, he's kind of indicated to me personally that he feels that there's going to be another round of funding for STP Rural, STP Urban, and STP Bridge, probably late this year or early next year. He's projecting it probably be late this year that I'll be submitting more projects in for ST Bridge. Those projects you're probably looking at, if I'm submitting here in 22, the earliest you can see construction on those are probably 25 or 26.
And then want to follow up on the NOFOs that the federal is releasing. Is those opportunities only for federal projects? Are they county projects also? I was on a webinar the other day, federal, and they were releasing a bunch of dollars, or they call them NOFOs, notifications for opportunities for funding for highway projects and applications.
What WISDOT likes to do, Department of Transportation likes to do in those projects, they like to take those projects because there's so much more red tape and process behind them, but then on the back end, they give some of their state dollars back to the counties. So I haven't seen the whole details on it yet, but that'd be my guess. It's normal to process what they do with those projects. They'll take them and they'll release some of their state funds to the counties.
I think
which is a good part.
specific to those are,
Some of the red tape that was tied to some of these funding allocations were they had to go to municipalities, not just to state. So there is opportunity for counties to apply for those funds or municipalities to apply for them that they were going to carve out separately. This portion is for state, but this was also for counties, cities, municipalities, towns.
Well, and the issue with that is there's so much need out there. I'll just tell you the first round of the funding, the applications that were due on April 3rd, and I thought I had a great chance because my projects were shovel-ready, basically all shovel-ready, no DNR impacts for Mr. Robinson. And there was 134 projects submitted, and 11 were selected. So, they're very competitive.
so I, just following up on Kurt's comments, there was a NACO regional meeting today, and Jennifer Jennings from NACO was a presenter, and they've got a matrix on their website outlining some of those programs and the deadlines. It probably would behoove us to look at it, but one of the programs that they were specifically referencing was one that avoided, the state has no involvement whatsoever, so we want to make sure that we're aware of that.
And there's certain allocations that they were providing directly to certain states. So every state was going to get some allocation, and and so there was going to be some allocation to the state municipalities, not the state government, state of Wisconsin. And so, I understand that there's, tremendous need, and there's multiple people applying. But if we don't apply, we can't even be awarded if we're not applying.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look what's out there. We usually don't miss many funding opportunities.
Absolutely.
And I think we have a meeting internally just talking about where we're going with some of the funding relative to that plan and the upcoming budgets, and that early July, so we can maybe talk about that at that time.
And Tim Ramberg is pretty much a state expert on GTA. He's working up our numbers right now for us. He cannot make it to our July meeting, unfortunately, but he will be attending our August infrastructure. So if you have any questions regarding GTA, he's a GTA guru.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. So I have two questions. The first one is, you touched on this, but I just want to be clear. For these items that are listed, we would not have funding in the normal budget? None of those would get done, or some of those would get done? How many?
None of those right now go in our normal budget. We normally run them through the CIP funding or short-term borrowing. Somehow they'll go through the CIP process. None of those go into my budget.
Well, isn't K in your budget?
Well, I haven't done the 2023
Okay, all
budget
right.
yet.
But you would normally not have money for a K in the normal budget, is
Our
what you're saying?
normal process would have been, it would be submitted to CIP. Hopefully it gets not, included into the CIP funding, and then I put it to transfer in my budget, coming through CIP, through transportation, to the highway department.
Can I just?
We would
Okay,
typically bond for those.
Okay.
exclusively.
I'll just say it a little differently. It's the same thing. They are built into the budget, but they're not funded through Jim's normal budget allocation for roadway projects. So he has a budget for bituminous resurfacing. These projects would be outside of that. They
But if-
would be. you
Would they
see
be
them in the
done if
budget.
we don't fund them with ARPA, I guess is the question. Would we still be doing them if we don't fund them with ARPA?
We
Well,
might
the
have to
board
bond
would,
for 'em.
the board would decide that through its annual budget
Sure.
process. You would simply have a different funding mechanism. You would either, as Jim referenced, short-term borrow or some other funding stream.
Okay, the second question, thank you for that, both of you. The second question is, you mentioned in the first page of your report that we're losing some gas tax money. Is that, so where are we gonna actually be losing revenue due to COVID?
That's one of the things that's unknown. I talked to Tim Ramberg about this already. The GTA is a share of costs. You get 19.04% share of costs. They know the revenues are down, so it depends on what 71 other counties have been doing out there. So if 71 other counties have been spending money like crazy, yes, we're gonna see a decrease in our GTA. If we start doing some of these projects and 70 other counties are sitting on their hand, you're gonna see our GTA go up maybe as much as 15%.
So that's not something we could estimate at this point as far as the effect?
All you can do is when you estimate, you use as everybody's flat. That's all we know. We won't know those numbers until the year end.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Go first next year.
Sure. The next item is processing criteria by which ARPA requests will be evaluated. I think in light of the hour, we need to be back here and we're missing two of our members, I'd like to hold that discussion until our next meeting. I would like to direct, though, the committee and others to the minutes from the September 28th and the October 26th meetings from 2021, where we talked about how we would go about allocating the ARPA dollars, and it gets into a discussion of scoring, and how does a request meet this county strategic comprehensive plan? Is this a service or program funding? Is it one-time funding? What return on investment for the Marathon County? We want to make sure that it's consistent with the Department of Treasury guidelines and the Wisconsin statutes. We want to make sure that that we're not creating ongoing obligations. We want to make sure that the money's going to be spent within that time frame. But I think at our next meeting, we'll need to talk about the criteria. One of the options would be to create some buckets to put funding in there. Again, that money has to be spent by December 31st of 2026, or we lose it. Under the current scenario, it must be earmarked or allocated or encumbered by December 31st of 2024. There are inflationary pressures, but there are also issues of performance and the ability to get things done. So we'll need to have that discussion. We can take it up at our next meeting. We may need a special meeting. Maybe I'll sit down with the administrator and look at it, but we will communicate to you if we go with a special meeting, depending upon how much other, Christie, I don't know what sort of other agenda items we have right now for that first meeting in July. But we were hoping to make a recommendation report to the county board at their July meeting. And we would do the same thing with the committee work plan, to kick that down to the next meeting. But I would like to have all of the members present if we can for this discussion. And Gail and Allison had to leave. So I'd like to make sure we've got all 7 members present. So we can send out that information. Maybe what we'll do is do a summary of what we've got. We've got some requests I think we'll also need to look at how do these projects relate to the capital improvement plan process. We'll need to talk through that and have a policy and figure out how that is. If they don't make it through that process, I don't think we want to fund it. So we'll have a little bit more thought on how that process will work at our next meeting, if that's acceptable to the committee. I'm seeing nods. All right, we'll plan on that, and that meeting would be on July 13th. Any other items that you would like to have us discuss at an upcoming meeting? I know maybe we can get an update from you, Molly, on the ERP and that.
Can we have a TID 101 class at some point, just so I can understand the ramifications of how that, well, I don't know, I've seen TID, TIF, whatever. See?
Well, it's a tax increment district, tax increment financing, so they're tied. They're tied together. One is the law and one is the project. So we can do that. Anything else? If not, number 8B would be, or number 9. Got to flip the page. What are your wishes? Moved by Chair Gibbs, seconded by Letmer to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? That carries. We will see you all in a little over an hour.
Do you have a second to educate me on something?
Sure.
Okay, last time we had a meeting, hold on, I gotta figure out which is the right one.